George Jackson, age 29, California Adult Authority inmate A63837. Imprisoned January 12, 1960. Offense, second-degree robbery.
Mrs. Jackson, how long has your son been in prison?
Since 1961.
And how did that all start?
He was with a fellow who arrived at a service station in Los Angeles. They were in his old car together, and according to a witness, a young man who worked at the filling station, he said that this man came in with a gun and robbed him, that he didn't see my son at all. This witness was at the courthouse the morning that they had the trial, the so-called trial, the hearing, the morning that the judge sent him to state prison with an indeterminate sentence. You know, that means that he can go there and stay 12 years before they decide how long they want to sentence him to stay. In the meantime, he's waiting there for the board to decide the number of years they want him to stay in prison.
Convicted of stealing $72 from a petrol station, Jackson had a juvenile record. He was advised to plead guilty to get a lighter sentence.
Sentence 1 year to life. Term served 11 years, 7 months, 7 years in solitary confinement.
1 to life means the convict is eligible for parole each year, subject to the judgment of a parole board. Jackson was refused parole 8 times.
January 1970. Charged with the murder of a prison guard. Future, if convicted, death row.
With 2 fellow prisoners, Jackson allegedly killed a prison guard in reprisal for the shooting of other convicts. The 3, George Jackson, Fleeta Drumgo, and John Cliché, became known as the Soledad brothers.
For 10 years, Jackson read and wrote constantly. Prison was his school. His letters were collected and published in a book. For him, the oppression and humiliation, the frustration and the violence of the prison system were but a reflection of what it was like to be a black man outside in American society. Prison made George Jackson a revolutionary. Violence he saw as the only instrument of change. Overnight, his letters made him an idol of the left and a respected literary figure.
The letters to my family, my mother, my father, sisters, my brother, John, they were intended to familiarize them with the situation I was faced with here. Of course, here in prison, we see the repression, the exploitation, the victimization of lower class peoples.
Jackson's political education was aided by one of those strange liberal quirks in California law which allows a prisoner mental, if not physical, freedom. Any book, revolutionary or otherwise, that the prisoner requires, the prison authorities are bound to let him have. Isn't one of the ironies that you can lock someone up for a long period of time and yet to give him access to any revolutionary material he requires? Thereby, don't you create a revolutionary?
If we put a man in a cell, and by his nature of his acting out, we are required to keep him in his cell, then we feed him all the revolutionary works, and George Jackson had, I guess, 100 or more revolutionary works. Of course it gives him nothing else to think about. He's not concerned about bettering himself. He's only looking forward to the day when he can get out and become a true revolutionary.
You guys want to step out in the chair?
Not only do prisoners have time to read and study revolution, they also have time to organize and fashion the instruments of guerrilla warfare, the bomb, the knife, and the gun. San Quentin has its own counter-insurgency troops.
Strip. Take your pants off. See your shoes?
These are the kind of weapons they're looking for: zip guns, knuckle dusters, knives and hatchets. They may be crude, but they kill. The violence that had been building up suddenly erupted at this prison a year last January. In a racial brawl, 3 black prisoners were shot down and killed by a white guard in a gun tower. A few days later, a white guard was murdered in retaliation. 3 black prisoners were charged with the killing. The prison was Soledad, and the accused became known as the Soledad brothers. George Jackson was regarded as being the ringleader.
Was the incident for which you're charged now, was it a revolutionary act on your part?
You asking me to confess to something? As a
Unless you want to, did you kill a man?
Look, one of the most important elements of guerrilla warfare is to maintain secrecy. I've killed nobody until, you know, it's been proven. And they'll never be able to prove anything like that.
Legal proceedings seemed to drag on endlessly, getting nowhere. In anger and frustration, George Jackson's 17-year-old brother Jonathan walked into the Marin County Courthouse where 3 black prisoners from San Quentin were on trial. He threw them some guns and with their help took the judge, a district attorney and some of the jury hostage in an attempt to ransom his brother. In the shootout with the police that followed, the judge, 2 black prisoners and Jonathan Jackson were killed.
The youngest and only other son in the Jackson family was Jonathan, an extremely political youth. Last August, Jonathan allegedly initiated an attempt to free 2 convicts on trial in a San Rafael courtroom. The judge, district attorney, and 3 jurors were taken hostage in a waiting van. As the truck pulled out of the parking lot, a force of police, prison guards, and deputies surrounded it. There was shooting. 4 persons lay dead, the judge, 2 convicts, and 17-year-old Jonathan Jackson.
Jonathan, well, he was at the school age. You know how it is when you're in school. You're taught a lot of things, but when you see that things aren't like you think they are, then you react. Especially a young person growing up in this day and age, they react violently, and especially when something is happening to maybe a person in your family, awful, dreadful injustice is happening to someone in your family that you love and respect very dearly.
Why do you think it happened?
Why? Because George was accused of this murder in January, and we had gone to court several times. We knew that he wasn't going to get any justice in the court. It was just obvious the way they were treated. They were shackled. They were in prison clothes. Their hair wasn't combed. Their hands were chained. Their feet were chained. They were chained through their crotch, around their waist, and they had steel leg guards.
When my son Jonathan was murdered over in San Marin, Marin County or wherever it is, I took him to Illinois to bury him. Before I could get him to the cemetery, the FBI had opened the casket and disarranged his body to the extent where it couldn't be viewed by his aunts and uncles and his cousins who came to see him to show their respect for him.
Why did they do that?
I don't know why they did it, unless they were looking for Angela Davis in the casket. And that's another thing I resent about this whole thing. I resent that this country thinks so little of its black male citizens that they have to say that a woman tells a man what to do. I believe my son was a man. He was 17, and I think he was a better man than a lot of people who live to be 90. I knew my son better than anybody. And I know that he wouldn't let anybody tell him what to do unless he wanted to do it himself. And I know he wouldn't let any woman tell him what to do. That I know. And I'm tired of reading the accounts of what he was thinking and how he wanted to commit suicide and all these things. I'm tired of reading about it. I'm tired of people telling what he was when people didn't even know him. How do they know what he was? He was a gentle person. He was always gentle and kind. And he liked people. And he never felt that people didn't like him. That was the sad part. He always felt that people liked him, and he knew when he ran into anybody who didn't, it really upset him. And he loved his family, and it always upset him because that George wasn't around.
For 10 years of his life, since he was 6, he hadn't
The only
seen
view
George
that he
outside.
saw of his brother was behind bars or in some waiting room with crowds of other people around. And to have to grow up like that, a male child have to grow up like that, it's terrible.
Why did Jonathan do what he did?
I think he did it for love. The love of his brother, and also love of his country. I think he probably, I try not to analyze him, because there's nobody knows what he was thinking except Jonathan. But I think he did it for love of his brother and his country. He was trying to wake the people in this country up to the fact that black people had nothing. You have nothing in this country. And he was trying to illustrate this to the people. That's what I think.
Did Jonathan know that he would probably be killed in the attempt?
I think he probably knew it. I'm pretty sure that he's intelligent, and I think that I would know that I would be killed if I tried something like that.
I think I would be the first to know if there was. I'm saying that there was no conspiracy, that Jonathan, a 17-year-old man-child, was working according to the dictates of his own mind. In fact, I'm convinced that everybody around him was making a tremendous effort to clip his wings, slow him down. I think most people saw that thing building in him. The loss of confidence, loss of faith in the processes that were going on, the court appearances in the Salinas, and the way we were being treated. I tried not to emphasize the foul treatment when he was around me. But,
Well, it seems to you then that this is something that it took a long time for Jonathan to come to the point he reached last Friday.
It built over a period of time. It built up over a period of time. Seeing the processes there in Salinas, Campbell, and Brazil, I think enough to shatter anybody's faith.
The guns that Jonathan Jackson used were shown to belong to Angela Davis, a black Marxist university professor whose political views had already involved her in clashes with the California establishment. She'd become a leading figure in the campaign to free George Jackson, and it was said George's brother Jonathan had become her bodyguard. A nationwide manhunt followed, and Angela Davis was put on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Several months later, with hair cut off and glasses changed, she was arrested in New York and sent back to California to stand trial. Trial proceedings started at the Marin County Courthouse, where the shooting had taken place. Angela Davis was very close to George Jackson. They were more than just revolutionary comrades. Some of the most intimate letters in Jackson's book had been addressed to her. For the past year, under the tightest and most sophisticated security conditions in America, Angela Davis has been held in the Marin County Jail, waiting for her trial proper to begin. She had not been allowed to give any television interviews. Our attempts to film an interview with Angela Davis are perhaps the best possible indication of the kind of fear and tension that surrounds her. After prolonged haggling, permission was granted for the interview to be shot through a soundproof, bulletproof screen. I was to be on one side, and Angela Davis was to be on the other. Our only means of communication was to be via the telephone. At last, the authorities gave way and allowed me behind the screen, but the film crew had to stay on the other side. Angela, some of the letters that George wrote you are not revolutionary tracts, but they're love letters in almost the romantic sense. How close were you to George?
Well, we were very close, both as revolutionary comrades and also in a personal sense.
How in a personal sense? How did you get to know each other?
The first time I met him was on the occasion of one of the court appearances in Salinas, California. I had not really expected the scene that confronted me when I walked into that courtroom and sat down and saw coming into the courtroom 3 black men who were chained and shackled. I had never seen black men before with chains all over their bodies. It was certainly reminiscent of slavery. And in spite of the fact that they were completely suppressed in a physical sense, you could see from the attitude and their demeanor when they entered the courtroom that they were not for a moment going to resign themselves to that situation, that they were that they had a very profound fighting spirit, and it was that which really affected me very strongly.
Can you understand what life was like for George Jackson in prison, now that you yourself have spent almost a year in prison yourself?
It's very difficult to understand, I think, for anyone who hasn't experienced what George experienced personally. I know that, you know, although I am in jail myself, certainly it is not identical to the type of experience that George had. 7 years in solitary confinement for a long time. He did not have access to the kinds of books that he wanted to continue his development. He did not have access to people on the outside, because the only individuals permitted to visit him were his family. And then also the fact that precisely because George refused to be the type of person that the prison system is designed to create, he experienced a surplus repression. He experienced a repression that was much, much more intense than anything I think I have individually gone through.
Three weeks ago, on August the 21st, at San Quentin Prison, George Jackson was killed, 2 days before his trial was finally due to begin. This is what the prison authorities say happened on that day. Stephen Bingham, a radical young attorney, came to visit Jackson and passed through a metal detector like this, which bleeped. His briefcase was searched and found to contain a tape recorder. Hidden inside it, say the authorities, was a gun like this, Bingham was also alleged to have smuggled in an afro wig, under which Jackson was to hide the gun to get it back to his cell. Jackson then walked through this door, so the authorities say, across the front courtyard of the prison and back to his cell in this block. Exactly what happened inside that block in the next 20 minutes, only a few people know, and most of them are dead. What we do know is that 25 prisoners were released. Then 3 white guards and 2 white inmates were killed. 2 of them had bullet wounds. All of them had their throats cut, with a razor blade embedded in a toothbrush. The alarm was sounded. Jackson ran out of the block and back across the courtyard, gun in hand. The authorities say he was shot twice, in the legs and through the head. He fell here and died, making for this wall 50 yards away and 25 feet high. That's the official version of Jackson's death. It raises several questions. I saw Jackson's body shortly after the shooting. I saw more wounds than the 2 that the authorities had stated. This week the pathologist finally published his report. Jackson, he said, was shot in the back. The bullet travelled upwards and out through the top of his head. This conflicts with the authorities' story. But yesterday, San Quentin still maintained that Jackson was shot from above, from a gun tower. Who killed George Jackson?
I don't know. I don't know by name, and I wouldn't tell you if I did, because this would be a matter, again, that goes before the courts. But he was killed by rifle fire from one of our armed posts, and if I were to anticipate your next question as to why was he killed, any man with a pistol in his hand running for the wall at this institution, if he was not shot at and either harmed or killed, the officer in the tower would be not doing his duty. That's exactly what he is there for.
I raised my children to love people. I raised them to mingle in American society, but American society didn't want them.
Do you think that George's death was inevitable, given the kind of things he was saying and writing?
They couldn't let him live. Wouldn't be any way possible for them to let him live. He's a black man. They're afraid that people will begin to listen, and they had. People all over the world had begun to listen to George, and I certainly know the people in this country had. That's the reason why they framed him to be murdered the way he was, to try to discredit everything that he had said, to try to paint him as an insane maniac, an animal. That was the reason for it.
Could he be violent?
Only if people were violent to him. I can be violent also, and I imagine so can you. You see, that's the whole story of America. They take their violence and turn it back around on somebody else. I don't have to talk about American violence. You can look all over the world and see American soldiers everywhere fighting in other people's countries and killing them. So if I were running the country in America, I wouldn't open my mouth about violence. As many people as they've murdered in Vietnam in the past 10 years, and they're going to talk about violence. As many black people that get killed every day in this country and nobody knows or cares, and they're going to tell me about violence. How they wiped out a whole nation of Indians, and they're going to say something to me about violence. I don't want to hear it.
I'm a black woman.
What were Jackson's aims?
Well, I think Jackson's aims have been clearly stated. He wants to become part of the revolution that overthrows society as it's today constituted. The establishment in this country, and of course as part of a worldwide movement. I don't think any question that he was dedicated to violence. His writings clearly state that he's dedicated to violence. That he didn't intend to ever get paroled from the California prison system. He intended to escape from the California prison system.
Was he violent?
Committed to struggle for the liberation of my people, and George Jackson is a black man committed to the struggle for the liberation of his people also.
Do revolutionaries like yourself and George Jackson have to die?
I mean, this is something that we realize as black people. it might possibly happen to any one of us, and especially if we have made it clear that we are going to continue to struggle no matter what the circumstances are. George certainly is a symbol, but he made very, very profound and very, very concrete contributions to the black liberation struggle in this country. Thousands, millions perhaps, of people who have read his book have seen articulated in this book the frustrations and the desires that black people have had for hundreds of years in this country. So in that sense, he is not just a martyr.
George says to us, "Arise and walk. Silver and gold have I none, but I give you what I have. In the name of Jesus of Nazareth, I say, rise up and walk. In the name of Denmark Vesey of Charleston, South Carolina, I say, rise up and walk. In the name of the Reverend Nat Turner of Southampton County, Virginia, I say, rise up and walk. In the name of Frederick Douglass, in the name of W.B. Du Bois, I say, rise up and walk. In the name of my brother, Jonathan Jackson, in the name of James McLean, in the name of William Christmas, in the name of Angela Davis, and in the name of George Jackson, I say, rise up and walk."
I know once I was lucky enough to talk to a counselor at San Quentin who happened to be a black man. And he told me that my son spoke out too much in his own defense. And if he would learn to keep quiet more and just be humble when he went before the board, take everything they accused him of and not say anything back, that he would be better off. But I don't see how a person can be better off making a dog of themselves or bowing down to anybody. And I think that I didn't raise them in the way where you could accuse them of something, and if they were guilty or not, they just take it. I think every man should have the right to stand up and defend himself. I don't think that should be a privilege only reserved for white people. I think black people should have it too. I have talked to prisoners who've come from San Quentin and Soledad and Tracy, who said that my son taught them how to read. And so I said, well, maybe if he has been in prison for 10 years and he's labeled an animal, he has done some good in this world. And that's the only consolation I can have right now, that he has tried to help his fellow man, even at the risk and the cost of his own life, and staying in prison.
1971, San Quentin. 3 guards and 2 prisoners killed in an alleged escape attempt. George Jackson shot dead.
Time seems to be passing much faster these last few months. I wonder where it's running to, what's building. Well, I'm positively displeased, and I'm positively destined to remain so. Someone may have to get hurt, but power to the people. George. Fear, the emotion that stiffens and inhibits the mind of most men, causing them to be incapable of acting in their defense at the moment of trial, is totally lacking in me. I could look upon my total ruin with as detached and unconcerned as I look upon theirs. The payment for life is death.
Say all the things that I should say.
George Jackson went to prison a rebellious 19-year-old black. 11 years inside, most of the time locked alone in a cell for 23.5 hours a day, turned him into a revolutionary. In a series of letters from prison, Jackson recorded his developing insight into the conditions of his country and people. Their publication made him famous. They became a vital text for black revolutionaries in America. Extracts are read during this film by an actor.
I've surrendered all hope of happiness for myself in this life to the prospect of effecting some improvement in our circumstances as a whole. I have a plan. I will give and give and give of myself until it proves our making or my end. I'll be starting anew. Well, I wish I could be like a bird in the sky. How sweet it would be if I found I could fly. I soar to the sun and look down at the sea. And I sing, 'cause I know that. And I sing, 'cause I know that. And I sing, 'cause I know. There's no turning back from awareness. If I were to alter myself now, I would always hate myself. I would grow old feeling that I'd failed an obligation and duty that is ours once we become aware. I would die as if most of us blacks have died over the last few centuries without having lived.
18 months before he was killed, George Jackson joined the Black Panther Party, the final stage in his political development. The Black Panther Party is the most militant black revolutionary group in America, a small force of armed and angry blacks dedicated to changing America at whatever cost to white society or to themselves. Imprisonment and death are familiar to them. Most of their leaders, including co-founders Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, have spent long periods in prison. Many of their members are dead. The events surrounding George Jackson's death in San Quentin remain unclear. This film does not attempt to explore them, but the Panthers insist he was murdered by prison guards. Many of the black community cannot accept that such a man would have died in a pointless escape attempt. This film records the mood surrounding his funeral among his own people. For them it was a political event, to be commemorated with music, poetry and speeches. For the Jackson family, violent death is not new. Only last year, Jonathan Jackson was killed during an attempt to force the release of his brother George.
From the book of the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 3, verses 2 through 6. And a certain man, lame from his mother's womb, was carried, whom they laid daily at the gate of the temple, to ask alms of them that entered into the temple, who, seeing Peter and John about to go into the temple, asked for alms. And Peter, looking at him with John, said, Look on us. And the beggar gave heed unto them, expecting to receive something from them.
If I leave here alive, I'll leave nothing behind. They never count me among the broken men, but I can't say that I'm normal either. I've been hungry too long. I've gotten angry too often. I've been lied to and insulted to too many times. They've pushed me over the line from which there can be no retreat. I know they won't be satisfied until they push me out of this existence altogether. I can still smile sometimes, but the time, when this thing is all over, I may not be a nice person. I just lit my 77th cigarette of this 21-hour day, and I'm gonna lay down for 2 or 3 hours, and perhaps I'll sleep. From that car with love, George.
Now, the history of the beggar is the history of our people. It's the history of black people. Because every black person in this country has been born lame and crippled from his mother's womb. From the time we've left the black wombs of our beautiful mothers, black people have been crippled and maimed and murdered, suffering from the black condition.
One of the things that we wanted people to understand, that the prisons are an animal all unto itself. you know, it has its own way of producing a certain kind of individual. A man, when he first goes to prison, comes there as a victim. He may be little aware of the kinds of circumstances that brought him there in terms of the courtroom, but after he is there are certain things that's made by the repressive kinds of situations. The fact that when you first come there, all your individuality is taken away from you. That's one of the reasons why you wear all the blue shirts there. Secondly, if you could understand what happens to a man's mentality after years of waking up to bells and going to bed by bells, going to work by work whistles, and not being allowed to make any decisions or function.
In the institutions, people constantly live in tension, It's not fear, but it's just tension.
The prisons, because of the kind of oppression, see, I think it's oppression that makes the so-called revolutionary. You know, the more pressure that's put on men, the more he's repressed and the more he's stifled, then the harder his will is, the more chances that he'll take. See, they have created a kind of person, you know, and mostly black people, man, who started out in these juvenile halls at 13, 8 years old, and they just graduate straight through the system. These people never get a chance to know their mother, their father. They never get a chance to have a decent relationship with the woman. They have no wives. They have no babies. They have no commitments to anything but to the guys on the inside.
The revolution out here is for the purpose of oppression in relation to material things, more so than it is in there. I feel the revolution in there is oppression in relation to the mentality.
Actually, the effect of that kind of process has now spread to the street, because you never...
To material things, more so than it is in there. I feel the revolution in there is oppression in relation to the mentality.
Actually, the effect of that kind of process has now spread to the street, because you never forget what was done to you, period. And that's the whole thing, is that inside prisons, the situation, you've created a group of monsters. You've actually constructed a monster factory. Now these monsters are coming home to you, and now everybody's trying to figure out what the hell is going on. But you've made them, you know, you are the cause of them, and now you're reaping exactly what you sowed.
Chairman of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, Bobby Seale.
These are some messages from around the world, from people, organizations, and black brothers incarcerated, black brothers and sisters incarcerated in the prisons in this country.
We're not dealing with anything arbitrary. We're dealing with survival. We're dealing with humanity trying to oppose the state's arbitrary decision to implement capital punishment. We must get rid of capital punishment. We're saying, in fact, that George Jackson had a right to defend himself, because the state had already arbitrarily chose to kill him, to murder him. Reagan's other state administrators, the parole board, and all the prison officials, etc., and the courts, etc., had already chose to murder George Jackson. Now, where are we going from there? How are you going to explain to the people that George Jackson had a right to defend himself because they had already arbitrarily chose to kill and murder him? A black revolutionary brother, a Black Panther Party member, Field Marshal of the Black Panther Party, acting as a general, defending himself on August, was it the 21st? Well, I say yeah. I say yeah, we say yeah, the party say yeah, we're not backing up off of it. He was a human being, he protected his human dignity, we're not going to jive with it. The people ain't going to jive with it, the party's not going to jive with it, we 1-1 with the people. George was 1-1 with the people, only separated from the people, along with 3,000 other inmates inside of San Quentin prison.
An empty bed, tears are shed. No more sun after I'm gone. My family cries. Their love has died. My friends are there. Death is the air. My chains unbound. I'm put in the ground. Everybody's sad, but I'm glad. It's lucky me, because now I'm free.
I'm by nature a gentleman. I love the simple things of life, good food, good wine, and expressive book, music, pretty black women. I used to find enjoyment in a walk in the rain, summer evenings in a place like Harrisburg. All of this is gone from me. All the gentle, shy characteristics of a black man have been wrung unceremoniously from my soul.
One time in life, a man must be whatever he wishes to be. And all men must see that one time is too much to tell any man that he...
The Minister of Defense of the Black Panther Party and a servant of the people, Huey P. Newton.
Power to the people, power to our fallen comrade, Brother George Jackson, member of the Black Panther Party. First, I would like to explain, because many people wonder, what was the connection between Brother George Jackson and the Black Panther Party. When I went to prison in 1967, I met George. When George was murdered in San Quentin, I suddenly realized that after years of conditioning himself, the prison officials had been branded with a force to respect him, because even in death he was their hero. They claimed that he killed 5 men and wounded 3 in approximately 30 seconds. This is impossible practically, but I like to accept it anyway because George is my hero. That even they would say he could do this impossible thing, and then they say he headed for the wall. The wall that's, I don't know, some 30 feet high, and that they say they murdered him because he was heading for that wall. He was gonna, maybe he would escape. He would have to scale that wall and fly over it. And I can't accept this practically, but I have to admit that accepting George as my hero and my stand, it will be necessary for us to do this. We have to either knock down or crush the wall of exploitation and oppression is very, very great. And the oppressed is very, very afraid. He's afraid that we have the Superman power, that we can do it. And we will raise our children to be like George Jackson, to live like George Jackson, and to fight for freedom as George Jackson fought for freedom. We say that even after death, George Jackson still is alive because his ideas, his spirit will be manifested in the physical. Again, we see our young Panthers here who are growing up, and they will grow up trying to live by the standard that George Jackson set. By this, George left a legacy, and he will go on.
Of course we need babies to help fight the protracted wars. Some of the comrades have different opinions on this question in principle, which would be, why should we allow this to happen to anyone else? But I support war on the family plan. The Vietnamese have 6-year-old mine planners. I think if I had been on the street from age 18 to 24, I would probably be a dope fiend or a small stakes gambler or humping the ground.
George certainly died in a significant way, and his death will be very heavy. While the ones that fell that day in San Quentin, their death will be lighter than a feather, because it's insignificant, and even those who support them now will not support them in the future, because we're determined to change their mind. We'll change their mind, or else in the people's name, we would have to wipe them out thoroughly, wholly, absolutely, and completely. All power to the people.
reckon all time in the future for the day of the man-child's death. Man-child, black man-child with submachine gun in hand. He was free for a while. I guess it's more than most of us can expect. I want people to wonder at what forces created him. Terribly vindictive, cold, calm, man-child courage. In one hand, a machine gun, in the other, scourge of the unrighteous and ox for the people to. In one hand, a machine gun, in the other, scourge of the unrighteous and ox for the people to ride.
It should be understood that my son was not a mad dog killer, that he was been portrayed to be a mad dog killer. His love was for all people, except those who sought to oppress others. Against this group, he leveled the constancy of his intellect, the might of his articulation, the power and passion of his manhood. To the former group, he dedicated his writings, gave all of the funds from his published and unpublished works, and his boundless warmth and love. Now that they have murdered the body of George Lester Jackson, which they are attempting to conceal with the Hitlerian technique of the big lie, they will attempt to eliminate the rest of the family through phony indictments and charges. We expect charges to be brought against us, but we have no fear. George Lester Jackson's spirit did not expire on August 21st, 1971.
Your brother, recognition don't come cheap anymore. You my lawyer, you my doctor, yeah, but somehow you forgot about me. And now when I see you, all I can say is peace. Peace go with your brother. Peace to your brother. Don't seem to matter much now, just what I say. Peace go with your brother. You the kind of man who think he got to have his own way. You my father, you my uncle and my cousin and my son. But sometimes I wish you were none. But I manage to smile and I say, peace go with your brother. Peace go with your brother. Don't make no sense for us to be arguing now. Time is right up on us now, brothers. Don't make no sense for us to be arguing now. All of your children and all of my children are gonna have to pay for our mistakes someday. Yes, and until then, may peace guide your way. Yeah. Peace go with your brother. Wherever you go, peace go with your brother.